with your host, Mike Haltman. It's the podcast that will answer your questions about many of the things in life we've always wanted to know more about. Our guests, experts in their chosen field, will enlighten us about subjects ranging from real estate, business, career, science, philanthropy, and much more. Proudly presented by Hallmark Abstract Service, it is once again time to sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride on our information superhighway. And now, here's Mike Haltman.
Hi, everyone. This is Mike Haltman. Welcome to Do You Ever Wonder? And today we have I think, a very important story. And, I introduced this when I promoted this episode. I called it multifamily punching bags. And why did I call it multifamily punching bags? Well, the reality is that while a lot of people think that multifamily building owners are all fat cats, 70% are small owners who own one or two buildings under 48 units, and they're in the business to, one, build wealth, because everyone wants to build wealth, and you hear that commercial property or real estate in general is a great way to build wealth, health too. Well, not necessarily, but you know it's not necessarily to build wealth, it's to support their families. And when you go into the red, and for circumstances not necessarily your own, it's a problem. And today we have a guest who was a victim of the process, and we're going to go through some of the issues that she dealt with, and issues that so many building owners are dealing with, because they're victim of the system. And that sounds onerous, but there is a system and they are victims. So just to lay it out there for people who may not be aware of the process, for a commercial multifamily building owner, they take in rent from their tenants. I've been a tenant and I paid rent. But that building owner has to take that rent and pay insurance, pay taxes, pay utilities, pay a mortgage, pay insurance, unless I already said that. And then at the end, they hopefully have something left over. But if you're not getting the rent side, then how do you pay those other expenses? And that brings us to our guests today. The first is Ann Korchak. Uh, she is an owner, but she's also the president of SPONY, which is the Small Property Owners of New York. It's are you a 501c3?
501c6.
Okay. So
So it's
they
officially a trade organization.
Okay. So they represent people like Emily Barlow, who is our other guest, who is a building owner who was subject to many of the issues that New York State, New York City put into effect, whether it's legislative, political, there was COVID, and she also faced issues in the courts. And all of those combined to really put the hammer down. And I welcome both of you. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having us.
You're welcome.
Absolutely. So Anne, just give a little brief overview. What does SPONY do?
So SPONY is primarily an advocacy group. We were founded back in the 80s, and we spend an awful lot of time reaching out to lawmakers, advocating for housing policies that will be good for the market in general, and share with them how the policies that they are considering passing, or ones that have already passed, like how it impacts the small property owner. And as you said, I mean, we're a very, very important part of the housing market here in New York. We are kind of the fabric of housing in many, many neighborhoods. Most people don't live in giant high-rise buildings. They live in neighborhoods. Like I drove to Williamsburg yesterday and drove through a portion of Greenpoint, I guess, also. And, the small, like, 2- and 3-story buildings, right, that have a couple of apartments in there. There are plenty of other 6-unit buildings, and we are housing New Yorkers. So, they don't often understand the impact that their policies have on those of us that are actually providing the housing.
Well, that's that's the essence of government, of leadership in government, where they make policy from on high and don't necessarily understand the impact on the ground. But when you do talk to legislators and try and advocate for your constituents, what response do you get?
Well, it varies. I mean, the one thing I would say is I'm always surprised at the response we get. I mean, even, say a prime sponsor of the good cause eviction bill, if not the lawmaker themselves, they will make staff available to speak to us. Their legislative directors, their, other staff members that are working with the legislator, to kind of understand these policies. So that part of my job, is not very hard, right? Because people are willing to talk. But, when you get into the conversation, sometimes they're, pretty uncomfortable. But I'm almost always they're respectful. I would say there's maybe in, the 300 calls I've participated in since 2020, I could probably count on one hand how many went kind of off the rails, because there was real ideological, kind of entrenched,
Of course. And,
discussions.
I think everyone's going to be respectful. Everyone's going to listen. Everyone's going to give you lip service from whichever side of the spectrum they're on. But at the end of the day, getting action is very difficult. And Emily, tell us a little bit about your story. What happened to you?
Well, it's a powerful story. My main concern about the United States, I'm an immigrant. I've been here about 24 years now. My main concern about the United States is the rule of law. The judge in the case was supposed to decide motions within 60 days. She took 6 months. And then she gave the tenant another 6 months after that, even though he never appeared in court once.
And your tenant was not paying rent, just to make
he didn't pay rent for 3 years and 9 months, and he didn't pay utilities for 3 years and 9 months. It was a 1-bedroom bungalow. We're not talking about Emily, the super rich here. It was a 1-bedroom bungalow in a beach community in Staten Island, and he didn't pay the utilities or the rent. So we're talking about $58,000 over almost 4 years. And we're talking about $500 a month in utilities between the water, the gas, and the electric that I had to pay to switch on. Otherwise, I was going to be fined $1,000 per day per utility. So I was basically held at gunpoint. That's how I looked at it. I had to basically work myself to death to pay all these different bills, including for the lawyers. And meanwhile, the judge just kept giving him more of what he wanted. And at the end of all of it, he ends up opening this Department of Corporations. You pay like a couple of $100, I guess, to some shyster who'll set it up for you. And then you can shield all your money there, so it can never be collected on. So yeah, to say that, how people wear those T-shirts that say, "I love New York." Well, I hate New York. Okay. Sorry, I do.
Okay,
And I lived in New York for 20 years.
So you've been beaten down by the system, and as someone who's watched the processes in the legal system, my wife was in a hard money residential construction business. They had tenants. Tenants are, unless depending on the jurisdiction, but the tenants typically get all of the favor of the courts. And was COVID at play in here, or was it purely you had a tenant came in, didn't want to pay, and that was it?
So the tenant lost his job in, I believe it was October of 2019, stopped paying rent in December of 2019. But remember, the 2019 laws came into effect, which meant that even a small owner such as myself has to give a very, very long period of time, like months and months notice before you can bring a suit. So, and then everything has to be served on the tenant after the required 60 to 90-day notice, depending on how long the tenant's been living there. And then you can finally file a lawsuit. And I had it converted to a holdover, I believe it was October of 2020, because of the way Governor Cuomo was speaking about failure to pay. For 20, 30, 40 years, it was never acceptable for a tenant not to pay rent. And then all of a sudden, the governor turns around and says, you don't have to pay rent, and there's nothing that your landlord can do about it. And that's basically how all the people that are scammers in the city took it when Governor Cuomo stood there and said what he said. So literally, I converted it to a holdover. The thing about that makes it very unpalatable about holdovers, they're only about 15%. I did some research out, obviously, the last few years. They're only about 15% of all the cases that wind their way through New York City Housing Court. And the reason for that is that they're not a very pleasant type of case to bring, because you're not making, you can ask for money, you can ask for what the tenant hasn't paid, but you're not asking specifically based on failure to pay. You're saying, I need the property back for whatever other reason. And in my case,
You're talking about getting back rent. You're talking about getting rent that has not been paid that you're owed.
yes, but a holdover is a special type of case where you're asking back for reasons other than failure to pay. You can ask for money as well, but your main reason, my reason was that I needed it back because it needed to be elevated. It was a Hurricane Sandy affected property that was renovated by the person before that I bought it from. But what he didn't realize about the deed was that it says in the deed you have to elevate it because it was a property affected by flooding with Sandy. And so the state requires it to be elevated and have a lot of major construction done to it. So even though it was beautiful inside, there was this attachment. So I had to do the work. So I attached all this information to the housing court case. The tenant never showed up. He didn't pay since before the pandemic, and the court just didn't care. What would have been like a 6 month, maybe 12-month, this is what the lawyers told me, before the pandemic with a failure to pay, it ended up being almost 4 years of nightmares.
Emily, where do you stand now?
In what respect? You mean politically, or?
Have you gotten the tenant out? Have you gotten any of the back rent that the tenant owes you?
No, I don't have a single dime of what he owes me. Like I said, he set up a corporation, his last name plus the word trucking LLC in the Department of Corporations in April of 2023. And I finally got him evicted by the marshal on August 7th of this year. So it was 3 years and 9 months after he stopped paying rent that he was finally made to leave. The main complicating factors were that he filed a COVID hardship form, but he waited until it had been served on him 3 times, the COVID hardship form, because the judge mailed it to him, and the judge basically got pissed off because he didn't fill it out. So she gave me a default money judgment in May of 2021. And she said in the order, I sent this to the tenant 3 times and he never returned it. So obviously he was mailed the default money judgment by the court. Within a day of receiving it, he then files the COVID hardship form. And all it is a little X on the form that says, I suffered during the pandemic, even though he lost his job 6 months before, 4 months, 5 months before the pandemic started.
So just not to interrupt, although I guess
yes,
what
that's
is
okay.
You use the word hardship, which is what the city and the state use to provide some kind of relief for your tenant. But what kind of hardship has the fact that you have not received any of this money done for you? Where do you stand in terms of, I don't know if you have a mortgage, I don't know if you have any back utilities you have to pay, but the state and the city talk about hardship in relation to people who, like your tenant, who for whatever reason haven't paid. And they bend over backwards to give them that relief. But you, as a small building owner, describe the hardship that not getting this rent has meant to you.
Well, it's like any business. If you want to drive your competitor out, you either undervalue their product in some way, or you drive your competitor into debt. And that's because they want to take over people's properties, because they want to drive landlords out of business and take their properties from them. They have basically would have driven me into a ton of debt on the utilities. And remember, New York has this law, which is called a tax lien foreclosure sale. The moment that you go $5,000 or more into the red on your utility bills or your property taxes, they can come and get your property from you in a tax lien foreclosure sale. So I just basically busted my ass making sure that I never got behind on the utilities and making sure that I paid my property taxes.
How did you
And
do
I
that?
just,
Did
what's
you
that?
did you have to take an extra job? Did you have to go into your like what was the
I had to
level?
work up to 100 hours a week, and I was getting like, I worked on my wedding day. I got married in February of 2023, and I
Yeah.
worked in the morning of my wedding day. Like, I was obsessed with working, and I still, to a degree, am obsessed with working. My husband thinks I'm nuts because I work all the time.
Well,
But the truth is that it's just pure fear. So, in other words, the thing that I am most passionate about is that I was driven into a state of fear for years on end because of the fact that I had to cover a whole ton of bills that I hadn't anticipated for almost 4 years. And
so
yes, before anyone wonders, did I get help from the government? The tenant applied for ERAP. And remember, I don't get to see any of his papers. So I don't get to see whether he said he was unemployed, whether he said he was injured, whether he said I don't get to see any of that because the government agency, OTDA, evaluates all that. But the moment that they say that your tenant qualifies for it, if you don't accept the money, the judge can turn around under the statute and force you to not be able to evict them for a year. So I turned around and thought, I need the money. I accepted the money. And then the judge gave him an extra year, even though he was paying nothing after I got the ERAP money too. The judge gave him an extra year after the ERAP money was issued to me. However, I want this to stay with in everybody's head. It's important. The utilities between just the gas and the electricity on a one-bedroom home. So National Grid and Con Edison, my bills added up to over $18,000 just for those two utilities, not property taxes, not water bills, just those two utilities, $18,000 minimum between November of 2019 and August of 2023 when he finally got evicted. And I got 19,500 from the state from ERAP. So the ERAP didn't even cover the gas and the electricity bills in the period that he was living there.
well, let me say this, Emily. Number one, I think you should be extremely proud of yourself because the system, as onerous as it was, tried to bring you down, and you did not permit that to happen. And you know, I think you should be very proud of yourself. But I think you symbolize the fact, and I think most people are not aware of it, that you are you are the poster child of your typical 70% of small building owners who are trying to wade their way through this system. You know, if you looked at the COVID crisis and the fact that there was a rent moratorium, whether or not people needed that rent moratorium is a question, but they got it. And your bills didn't stop, your expenses didn't stop, and it's a horror show. And I again, not to beat a dead horse, but I think it's endemic of the problem that a lot of the people who make policy have never worked a day in the shoes of the people that they make policy for. Speaking of which, Anne, the 2019 Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act, how much of an impact did that have on your members?
Oh, a tremendous impact. And it's not just for rent stabilized owners. I mean, that bill, has portions that apply to every housing provider around the state. So those that are operating rent stabilized housing, it gutted our ability to make any significant improvements to vacant apartments. Typically, rent stabilized apartments, the tenant will stay in occupancy for decades. So once they leave, it's not just slapping a coat of paint on. Oftentimes the whole bathroom needs to be renovated, the kitchen, maybe upgrading electric. It also gutted the major capital improvement program, which allowed owners to do major projects like roofs, facades, upgrade boilers. For every provider, HSTPA changed the rules about numbers of days notice, on lease renewals. It stopped the ability to collect more than 1 month's rent up front, which was a very common practice, especially for tenants that were coming to a lease transaction with no credit. Right. So particularly in college towns where there are students that are coming from other parts of the world, parent would come and just write one check, for 12 months worth of rent and then just, fly back to wherever it was they came from. And we're no longer able to do that.
Well, because ultimately that act that was put into, it was brought in ostensibly to serve the tenant, to make the life of the tenant better. But by hurting the landlords, by alleviating their ability to maintain a building, by alleviating their incentive to put improvements into a building, is it another case where what was meant to help the tenant is going to ultimately end up hurting the tenant?
Well, yes, I mean, the stability of the whole industry, the whole market, the rent stabilized housing market is compromised because of that bill. And then when you add in, the perfect storm of the pandemic, right, rising interest rates, soaring inflation, labor shortage, supply chains. I mean, it's a perfect storm. And you read it every day. There are buildings that, are, you know, not solvent. And, people that live in buildings where the owners can't pay the debt and the taxes and all these other things, maintenance suffers. The residents' lives are not made better by
Correct.
living in a building that is being crushed under these incredible stresses.
So if you, and I don't know if you can, but if you had one paragraph to say to the politicians, and I know there's some politicians in New York State who are obstructing any viable improvements to the lives of building owners and landlords, what would you say to them?
That I think they should be more aware that we're actually providing an essential service. We should be partners. We shouldn't be vilified. We shouldn't be crushed with punitive legislation. And they are making the market worse by not thinking through some of these policies.
Well, to your point of making the market worse, rents in New York City are at all-time highs at a time when the economy is not at an all-time high, and yet I forget the statistic, but it's in the tens of thousands of units that are being held off the market, mostly because of the legislation that the powers that be have put into place, unless I'm misreading the situation. But their act, their legislation supposedly meant to help the tenant has once again screwed the tenant. I mean, would you agree with that?
I would. I mean, and I wouldn't agree with the terminology held off the market. They've created a condition and an environment where I can't upgrade an empty apartment that was occupied for 50 plus years by a hoarder who didn't let us go in and do periodic maintenance. When she passed away in 2021, it was so overwhelming to deal with what she left behind. And once it was all emptied and I brought a contractor in, first an architect, he drew up some plans so we could submit them to the city. And then the estimates that I got to do this work went from $170,000 to $300,000, right? We don't have that capital to do that. I don't have access to capital the way a giant building, owner does.
So what would you have been able to raise that rent from to?
It's just about $1,100, the legal rent, and it would be less than $90 I could add on to that.
After investing 300 grand to bring it
Correct.
up to standards. So
Right.
it's incredible, and right, it's absolutely, I mean, it's mind-boggling. So few things get me as passionate as talking about politics, which my wife hates. But you know, the fact is that let's bring up another point. Local Law 97. How, it's great. Let's be green. I think that's great. But how is that? How can you, the small business owner, and although I think there's what, a 25,000 square foot.
Right. It doesn't impact many small property owners at this point, but you could
It's coming.
see, of course, right. Although it's interesting, the city just announced that they were going to delay,
Yes.
right?
Two
Right, the
years,
punitive, right? Because the lawmakers didn't think through,
of course.
how this really, in the real world, how can people get this work done?
So they're giving you 2 years, but I believe I read only if you've already begun the process. If you haven't begun the process, which I imagine a lot of people have not, then I don't know how that's going to work. But when you're in a city, the fines, the penalties, they add up. It's incredible.
Right. Well, like Emily said, right? I mean, and it's not only just the city, right? I mean, Con Ed or National Grid are not political state agencies, but they're wielding the same sort of punitive power, right? You heard Emily talk about the crazy number, $1,000 per day per utility. She would be fined if she stopped paying.
But, I wanted to just interject for 10 seconds and say one quick thing. I want everybody to think about the fact that I was only charging this guy $1,300 for like a bungalow with a garden and like a driveway. So I was actually doing that because it was a young couple with a kid and I wanted to help them out. And that was my one rental property. Okay. I just want Ed to sink in for a second that that's one affordable unit that is no longer ever going to be on the market ever. So if they care so much about affordable housing, why are they wiping out affordable housing providers? And I'll tell you why. Because they want to make their version of affordable housing, which is state-owned property. And that's all that they're interested in. That if they were so interested in protecting small property owners, they would have had a more streamlined process like they did in Jersey. In Jersey, which again, most of the voters here are, I believe, like there's more homeowner voters in Jersey than there are in New York City. So there was more empathy for people such as myself out here in Jersey than I'm in Jersey where I'm living right now, which then actually in New York City where it's predominantly renters. And when you're a renter, do you really know how much a furnace is? Do you really know how much a refrigerator is?
You really
Unless
do.
you go out and buy these things, but if you're a small homeowner in Jersey, you're like, oh God, yeah, I went and bought a refrigerator and it was $1,500. Like there's you automatically have some knowledge at your fingertips, not because you want to, but because you did a baptism by fire by owning a property.
I think you said the magic word is that the majority of people in New York City are renters. So if I'm running for mayor or I'm already a congressman, who am I going to try and implement legislation to help? The the tens of thousands of tenants or the few landlords and building owners. So, therein lies one of the big problems, which is politics. Politics gets in the way of a lot of good things. And I
Right,
think,
but politics shouldn't get in the way of,
of course,
basic property rights,
of
right?
course,
Right.
or of
And
basic common sense. And,
right.
if you're going to implement laws that, like the 2019 Act, that ultimately are going to hurt tenants, but in the beginning are going to seem like you're helping tenants, you're going to be out of office and gone by the time that problem hits the fan. So this, you know what? People use the word a lot, accountability, and there is none. There's no accountability except to people like Emily. Emily was held accountable for the decisions of by
Right.
the decisions of others, and I can know how many members of Spony are there.
We are approximately 600,
Okay, and
right?
that's in
And we
common.
range from, small building owners to, owners like Emily, that have one single property. Um,
And are many of your members motivated, uh, mobilized to do things, to try and I'm sure you have what do they call those days when you go up to Albany and
oh, a
lobby?
lobbying day?
Yeah.
Yeah, we've done actually most of our lobbying, in this format, Zoom, because we were told that um, it's it's such a politically charged and intense arena, housing, and the tenant activists are in Albany, wandering the halls, and if they see a group of small property owners, walking out of somebody's office, they're going to then go and harass the lawmakers, say, "What are you doing talking to them?" You know,
So
so this format tends to be work better for us.
I love this format, and you know what? Without this format, how could I have two people on like you? But you talk about affordable housing, the importance of affordable housing, the lip service given to affordable housing, and yet 421A is gone, and whether or not it comes back is a question. But what do they do to really allow affordable housing to be built? And it seems not as much as they probably could or should.
Yeah. New York City and New York State are, incredibly inhospitable places to run businesses these days. And
Okay.
housing would probably be, the arena where it's most inhospitable.
Okay.
But clearly we need a lot more housing. So
But a lot
they're
of
going to have to come
investors
to
are
some
looking
agreement.
elsewhere. They're going down south. They're, you know, money is, what does my wife say? Money is fungible. I mean, money votes with its feet, and people are choosing not to get involved in the arena that's totally tilted against one side of a transaction. So it's,
Right. Right. And Emily can't lift up her building and move it, to another state. I can't do the same with our building. So those of us that are already operating are the ones that are bearing the brunt of, the crush of, you know,
uh,
because there's not enough housing. So they make it harder on us, those of us that are already providing housing.
so Emily and Sarah, have you, and Ann, I'm sorry, not Sarah.
That's okay.
Have you ever thought of running for office?
No, I have not. Emily?
Emily?
I mean, I am a US citizen. I'm just a dual citizen of England as well because I was raised there. So I don't know if that would ever affect it. Um, I, I, I don't think I would run for office just because I'm not sure I would have the confidence in myself to think I could get anything done that was actually going to mean something. I tend to have a very jaded view of politicians. The one that did help was Max Rose, and I felt he had a strong sense of public service because he'd been in the military, and my husband is a veteran of the Battle of Fallujah. So I guess I look at people that have a strong sense of public service in their actions as more than the people that just say things like politicians. So in other words, I think that the problem with New York, though, is that it was hijacked by extremist politicians, and they have not wanted to meet in the middle, and they've not needed to meet in the middle because they have supermajority in various contexts. And I think what's really going to end up happening is that small, affordable housing providers, which I was one, I really was, and it wasn't a crappy place to live. It was nice until he ruined it because, after the eviction, I went inside and it was kind of hellish in there. So by sort of them having this very idealistic view of what affordable housing is, which is it's only property owned by the state, what they're actually going to achieve is that you're only really going to be able to have really big players in the property market because they're the only ones that can bear the risks, both the insurance risks and the loan risks. Because who wants to lend to me who would want to lend to me to renovate this little house that I rented out? Who would want to lend to me when I come to them and I show them that I haven't had an income for almost 4 years on the property? In other words, people don't want to give you money to fix things up if you can't show that you've got some income, that you're not good for repaying the money that you borrow. And it's the same thing that goes for when you and I go and try and get a car loan or some kind of a personal loan or a loan for school. They want to know that you're good for the money to pay it back. And unfortunately, the only people that can weather a storm as long as this are really the big players who maybe you've got a big building and it's one or two tenants that didn't pay, but the rest of it's profitable. But for small owners, the ratio of what you've lost and your credibility with banks, with lenders, with insurance companies, it's down the toilet. So in other words, they're driving out the small players, much the same as the taxi drivers got driven out of New York in terms of their profitability with the medallion thing, and much the same as the small hardware stores and the small mom and pop stores with Amazon. You're seeing this consolidation with housing in these urban areas. And so what they're really actually doing is they're driving out the middle class. What a surprise, the middle doesn't have a voice. We've known it for a while. We don't have the same voice as the big private equity guys and JP Morgan who can come in and buy up the distressed properties and have first dibs when the tax lien foreclosure sales come for these small people who maybe didn't have the ability to work 100 hours a week. Maybe they were 95 years old, some of these landlords.
So, Emily, you speak the truth. You are very eloquent, and I think you would make a good candidate if you so chose. And I would cast a vote for you. But in the meantime, I just want to say that having both of you on has been great because I enjoyed the conversation. I hope other people might enjoy the conversation. But I think you've really given an idea of the hurdles and the hurt and the pain and the frustrations, and let me think of some other adjectives. But I think those
The long list.
it's a long list, but I think that expresses it a little bit. But again, I give you a whole lot of credit, Emily. I think you've persevered. You've fought the fight as well as you can in a system that maybe hasn't been conducive for that fight from your point of view, which I agree with. And I know that whatever it is you can do going forward, I think you're going to be great. And congratulations on getting married. That's terrific too. This year will be 37 years for me. They actually say murderers get less, but that's a whole nother story. But Anne, thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak to your viewers. Because like I said, do you wonder? I can't imagine anybody could wonder, this sort of thing that Emily has endured and plenty of other small property owners.
You know
It's
what?
not fair.
A lot of people don't wonder about it, but hopefully they will start to, because you talk about equity and fairness, and the system that Emily's been through and a lot of your other members have been through is not equitable or fair. So,
well, I think some people, that's the word, isn't it? Equity. So I would use the word culture as a counteractive, which is we all know what's right and we all know what's wrong. And you can pull the wool over the people of New York's eyes for a while, but they're going to keep pushing at the seams. It's like a bully. They want everything their way. And eventually they're going to do something where everyone's eyebrows gets raised and they're going to be like, nah, that's definitely not right.
well,
And I believe in culture and I believe in working hard. And my family's from the north of Wales, where they had absolutely nothing. They were living on tithed properties. I don't know if you know what that is, but they literally lived in cottages owned by farmers for centuries and centuries. And they believed in working hard and paying their bills. So I tell everybody out there, move to communities where you're surrounded by people, by neighbors, by people that have the same culture as you. They believe in working hard and paying their bills, because that's the type of community where you all profit together.
well, thank you for that, and thank you both. And I
Okay.
hope to have you back on when the resolution of your story is not only finished, but also a good one. So
Thank you.
thank
All
you.
right. Thanks, Michael.
Have a good one. Bye.
Welcome, everybody.